There is a certain kind of cold that has nothing to do with the weather. It's a cold that seeps from the landscape itself, a chill that radiates from fear. It lives in the gray uniforms of soldiers at checkpoints, in the silent, watchful eyes of strangers, in the vast, empty spaces between towns where anything could happen and no one would ever know. This was the cold of Nazi-occupied Europe in 1942. And driving straight into its heart was a woman who had no business being there. On the surface, she was everything the Third Reich was meant to admire. She was an aristocrat, an Italian, a citizen of a friendly Axis power. She was beautiful, impeccably dressed, and possessed an air of unshakable confidence that came from a lifetime of privilege. But beneath the couture, behind the disarming smile, was a will of iron and a secret that could get her executed. The pearls were a disguise, the diplomatic passport was a weapon, and the luxury automobile she drove was a vessel of rebellion, a lifeline smuggling money, secrets, and human souls through the arteries of a dying continent. This is the story of a woman who was born to be a princess, but chose to become a warrior. A woman who possessed one of the great fortunes of Europe and spent it on the currency of hope. It is the story of Luciana Frassati-Gawronska, a hero whose name you've likely never heard, and whose ghost has waited decades for the world to finally listen, to truly understand the impossible choices Luciana would one day make. We must first immerse ourselves in the world that forged her. It was a world of spectacular contradictions. She was born in 1902 in Turin, Italy, into a dynasty of influence. Her father, Alfredo Frassati, was not merely a rich man, he was a titan. As the founder, owner, and editor of La Stampa, he commanded one of the most powerful political and cultural platforms in the nation. The Frassati name was synonymous with a certain kind of classical, liberal intellectualism, a belief in progress, parliamentary democracy, and civic reason. Their family villa was the epicenter of this world, a salon where the future of Italy was debated over fine wine and under priceless works of art. Alfredo himself was made a senator for life, a testament to his stature. But this world of refined, rational order was built on cracking foundations. The Italy of Luciana's youth was a nation nursing a deep wound. Despite being on the winning side of World War I, Italians felt cheated by the peace treaties, a feeling encapsulated in the phrase vittoria mutilata, the mutilated victory. This national humiliation, combined with post-war economic chaos and the terrifying rise of communist agitation known as the Biennio Rosso, the 2 red years, created a vortex of fear and instability. Into this vortex stepped Benito Mussolini. Fascism offered a brutal, simple solution: order through strength, nationalism through violence, and the silencing of all dissent. For men like Alfredo Frassati, Mussolini was the antithesis of everything they held dear. He was a vulgar strongman, an enemy of free press and free thought. From the very beginning, Alfredo used the considerable power of La Stampa to denounce the black shirts, to expose their thuggery, and to warn Italy of the abyss it was approaching. It was a brave but ultimately doomed crusade. The tide of history was against him. And for his defiance, Alfredo would pay dearly, eventually being strong-armed by the regime into selling his beloved newspaper in 1926, effectively silencing one of the nation's most important anti-fascist voices. This was the first great lesson of Luciana's life. She saw firsthand that standing for one's principles in the face of tyranny came with a punishing cost. She saw her powerful father brought to heel by brute force. But there was another equally powerful influence shaping her conscience, one that came not from the political salon, but from the realm of the spirit. It came from her older brother, Pier Giorgio Frassati. Pier Giorgio was a force of nature, handsome, athletic, and perpetually joyful. He was the charismatic heart of the family. But his passions were not for wealth or status. He was a devout Catholic, but his faith was not one of quiet, personal piety. It was a faith of explosive action. A member of Catholic Action and other groups, he dedicated his life to serving the poorest of Turin. He would give away his money, his coat, even his bus fare, to those in need, often returning home late at night on foot. Crucially, he was also a fervent anti-fascist, seeing the regime as a pagan ideology of power that was fundamentally incompatible with Christian teachings. He was known to get into physical altercations with Mussolini's thugs. For Pier Giorgio, faith demanded social and political courage. He famously said, "Charity is not enough. We need social reform." He believed in changing the system that created poverty, not just alleviating its symptoms. In 1925, at the age of just 24, this vibrant life was extinguished. Pier Giorgio contracted fulminant polio, almost certainly from one of the sick families he ministered to in the city's slums. His death devastated the family and sent shockwaves through the community, but his legacy only grew. He became an icon for Catholic youth, a symbol of how to live a modern, engaged, and courageous faith. In 1990, Pope John Paul II, a fellow mountaineer and admirer, beatified him, placing him one step away from sainthood. For his younger sister, Luciana, Pier Giorgio was more than a brother. He was a moral compass. His life was a blueprint. From her father, she inherited a political education in the evils of fascism. From her brother, she inherited a spiritual mandate to act on her beliefs, no matter the personal cost. This dual inheritance, the political and the spiritual, was the bedrock upon which her future life of defiance would be built. Armed with a law degree from the University of Turin, a rare achievement for a woman of her time, she was not just an heiress. She was an intellectual and a moralist, waiting for her moment. That moment began to crystallize in 1925, the same tragic year of her brother's death. Luciana married Jan Karski, a scion of the Polish nobility and a rising star in his country's diplomatic corps. Their union was a bridge between two of Europe's most storied Catholic cultures, but it was also Luciana's personal passage into the epicenter of the continent's geopolitical fault line. She moved with him as his career progressed, from Ankara to Vienna, and finally to Warsaw. Poland in the interwar years was a nation living on borrowed time, resurrected after more than a century of partition, but now squeezed between two ravenous totalitarian empires, Hitler's Germany and Stalin's Soviet Union. As the wife of a senior diplomat, Jan would become the last Polish ambassador to Austria. Luciana became a keen observer of the chess game of nations. She hosted dinners where whispered conversations about pacts and invasions were the main course. She saw the growing panic in the eyes of Jewish friends and colleagues. She was no longer just an Italian. Her fate was now inextricably linked with Poland's. The storm broke in March 1938 with the Anschluss, Germany's annexation of Austria. The Gawronskis were in Vienna and witnessed the horrifying spectacle firsthand. The cheering crowds, the Nazi flags unfurling overnight, the immediate and brutal persecution of Jews. The world they knew was dissolving. A year and a half later, on September 1st, 1939, the final illusion of peace was shattered. German panzers rolled across the Polish border. The path of least resistance for Luciana was obvious. She was the mother of 6 children. She was an Italian national with a diplomatic passport. Her duty, by any conventional measure, was to take her family and flee to the safety of her native Italy. She did send her children away, ensuring their safety with relatives, but she herself made a decision that was as radical as it was dangerous. She would not abandon her husband's country. Jan joined the Polish government in exile, first in Paris, then in London, to continue the fight diplomatically. Luciana, in an act of breathtaking courage, chose to stay behind in occupied Warsaw. She decided her war would be fought not in the halls of power, but on the frozen roads and in the darkest corners of the Nazi Empire. The socialite was gone. The operative had been born. What followed was one of the most sustained and audacious solo resistance campaigns of the Second World War. Between the fall of Warsaw in 1939 and her narrow escape in 1945, Luciana Gawronska undertook 7 distinct death-defying missions. She became a vital moving cog in the machinery of the Polish underground state, the most complex and effective resistance network in occupied Europe. Her cover was her identity. She was Signora Gawronska, the impeccably dressed, slightly haughty Italian aristocrat. She played this role with theatrical flair. Her fluency in German, her air of command, and her Italian passport were her tools of deception. To the German authorities, she was a minor nuisance, a well-connected woman from an allied nation who was probably just looking after family property. This profound miscalculation would save hundreds of lives. Her chariot of war was her personal automobile. With its diplomatic plates, it was less likely to be subjected to the most invasive searches. This car became a mobile command center, a sanctuary, and a Trojan horse. Her early missions focused on establishing a lifeline. The Polish Home Army, the Armia Krajowa, was fighting a desperate underground war and was cut off from its government in exile. It needed money, equipment, and information. Luciana became their most reliable courier. On her drives from Warsaw or Krakow through Berlin and on to Rome, she would conceal vast sums of money, dollars and Swiss francs, delivered by Allied agents in neutral Switzerland and funneled through the Vatican, that were the lifeblood of the resistance. She hid microfilm with painstakingly detailed intelligence reports on German troop movements, factory production, and the unfolding atrocities. These weren't vague messages. They were the hard data the Allies desperately needed. But soon, her missions evolved from carrying money and secrets to carrying human beings. She became a conductor on a modern-day underground railroad. She would fill her car with Polish resistance fighters who needed to get to the West, downed Allied airmen, and most perilously, Jews escaping the ghettos. She would hide them under blankets, in the trunk, or have them sit beside her, armed with forged papers she had helped procure. One of her most critical associations was with Jan Karski. Karski was a legendary figure, a Polish officer tasked with one of history's most vital and tragic missions, to be smuggled out of Poland to personally inform British Foreign Secretary Anthony Eden and U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt of the systematic extermination of Europe's Jews. Getting Karski and his world-changing testimony out was a top priority for the resistance. On several occasions, Luciana was the one who drove him across the most dangerous legs of his journey, her diplomatic car providing the perfect cover for one of the war's most important spies. Her book, written after the war, Il destino passa da Varsavia, Destiny Passes Through Warsaw, is a chilling first-hand account of these journeys. She writes not with bravado, but with a stark, terrifying clarity. She describes the perpetual dialogue with fear, the pounding of her heart at checkpoints, the challenge of maintaining a mask of boredom while a Gestapo officer's flashlight swept over a blanket concealing a fugitive. She recalls driving through the ruins of the Warsaw Ghetto, which she was able to enter using her credentials, witnessing scenes of such unimaginable horror that they haunted her for the rest of her life. She was one of the very first outsiders to provide a credible eyewitness report on the conditions inside that sealed-off world of methodical death. Her courage took her to the gates of hell itself. She used her status and her fluent German to bluff her way into some of the most feared Nazi prisons, like the infamous Pawiak prison in Warsaw. Dressed in her finest clothes, she would march in and present a list of names to the commandant, claiming with utter conviction that these were Italian workers or persons under the protection of the Italian embassy. She was, in effect, performing a heist of human beings. She brought in coded messages, medicine, and food, a lifeline that gave prisoners the strength to endure. In several documented cases, her monumental bluff worked. She walked out of the prison gates with stunned, liberated prisoners, shielding them with her own aristocratic aura until they could be hidden in a safe house. One account from her memoir encapsulates the spirit of her work. Inside a prison, she managed to pass a small, precious piece of chocolate to an emaciated female prisoner. The woman near death looked at it, then at Luciana, and said, "Can I save it for my son?" In that moment, Luciana understood her mission was not just about fighting the Germans. It was about preserving the sliver of humanity the Nazis were trying to extinguish, a mother's love, a stranger's compassion. By 1944, her luck was beginning to run out. The Gestapo, while slow, were not stupid. The file on the meddling Italian woman was growing thicker. They started tracking her movements. Her name was mentioned in interrogations. On her seventh and final mission, she was warned by a contact within the German security apparatus itself that an arrest warrant was imminent. She escaped Poland just in time, the net closing behind her. She had played her hand for 5 long years and had won, but only just. When the guns of Europe finally fell silent in May 1945, a wave of collective relief and celebration swept the Allied world. But for Luciana Gawronska, the end of the war did not bring parades or medals. Instead, it brought a new kind of struggle, a quieter but equally painful battle against the twin forces of political expediency and historical amnesia. Her heroism, born in the shadows, would be condemned to remain there at a staggering personal cost. The first wall of silence she encountered was in her own homeland, Italy. The new Italian Republic was born from a deeply fractured society. It was a nation trying to stitch itself back together after 2 decades of fascism and a brutal civil war. The prevailing unspoken agreement was voltare pagina, to turn the page. There was little appetite for a full reckoning with the past. To celebrate a genuine anti-fascist hero like Luciana would have been to cast a harsh light on the vast zona grigia, the gray zone where millions had lived. It would have highlighted the complicity of the industrialists, the silence of the middle classes, and the active collaboration of many in the aristocracy. Luciana's very existence was an inconvenience. Her choices were a rebuke to her own class. The Italian elites who had weathered the fascist storm by staying quiet or making deals with Mussolini's regime now sought to reclaim their power in the new democracy. They did not want a living, breathing reminder of their moral compromises sitting at the dinner table. Luciana's unwavering moral clarity was a threat to their carefully constructed post-war narrative of "we were all victims." This social and political ostracism had devastating financial consequences. The great Frassati fortune, the publishing empire and assets she should have been a principal heir to, slipped through her fingers. In the complex restructuring of family holdings and political alliances after the war, the reckless anti-fascist daughter was pushed aside. It wasn't a single dramatic act of disinheritance, but a slow, methodical freezing out. She had chosen humanity over her inheritance, and the guardians of that inheritance never forgave her for it. The second wall of silence was erected in Poland, the nation to which she had given so much. Had Poland been liberated by the Western Allies, Luciana would undoubtedly have been hailed as a national hero. But Poland was liberated by the Soviet Red Army, which quickly installed a communist puppet government. This new regime had its own story to tell, one that centered on the triumph of communism over fascism. In this narrative, the true Polish heroes of the war, the fiercely independent and non-communist Home Army, were recast as enemies of the state. Thousands of its members were arrested, tortured, and executed by the new communist secret police. To celebrate Luciana would have been to celebrate her work with this very Home Army. Furthermore, the communists had no interest in lionizing a wealthy, Catholic Italian noblewoman. She represented everything their ideology sought to destroy: class, religion, and ties to the West. And so in the country she loved and risked everything for, her story was deliberately buried. She was a hero to the wrong side of the post-war divide. Caught between an Italy that wanted to forget and a Poland that needed to rewrite its history, Luciana Gawronska effectively vanished. The woman who had faced down the Gestapo now faced a more insidious foe: obscurity. She lived out the remaining 6 decades of her life in Rome, in relative poverty and almost complete anonymity. Her children grew up, and she became a grandmother, a life rich in family but bereft of public recognition. Her incredible story was confined to the pages of her memoir, a book that was little read outside a small circle of historians. She never expressed bitterness, only a profound sadness for the historical injustices she had witnessed. She watched as the world moved on, her role in its survival, a secret she carried with dignity and silence. When she passed away in 2007, at the remarkable age of 105, her death was barely a footnote, a few lines in some Italian newspapers, nothing more. One of the great heroes of the 20th century had died, and the world had not noticed. But a story this powerful cannot remain buried forever. Truth, like a river, will eventually find its way to the surface. In the 21st century, as archives in Eastern Europe opened and a new generation of historians began looking past the old state-sanctioned narratives, Luciana's name began to reappear. Researchers in Italy, Poland, and America stumbled upon her memoir and realized they were holding an undiscovered treasure. They began to piece together the puzzle, cross-referencing her accounts with German records, Polish resistance archives, and Allied intelligence files, and they confirmed it all: the 7 missions, the money, the intelligence, the people she saved. The story was not an exaggeration. If anything, she had understated her own role. The rediscovery of Luciana Gawronska is more than just a historical correction. It is a profound lesson in the nature of legacy. Her life challenges our modern obsession with fame and recognition. She acted without an audience. She fought without a uniform. She won victories that were never announced. Her reward was not in medals or monuments, but in the quiet knowledge that she had answered the call of her conscience, that she had honored the legacy of her brother Pier Giorgio, and that she had chosen the difficult path of human decency in a world gone mad. Her life is a powerful counter-narrative to the idea of the helpless bystander. She demonstrates that privilege, which so often insulates people from the world's suffering, can also be weaponized for good. She possessed power, wealth, and status, and instead of using them to protect herself, she spent them to protect others. That's a wrap for today's video. If you enjoyed it, smash that like button, drop us a comment below, and don't forget to subscribe so you'll never miss our new content. Thanks for watching.